Why you're always stressed. The Buddhist explanation. The world tightens around the chest long before we notice it. Not because something is wrong with the world, but because something inside us is pulling, grasping, bracing against a life that never promised to stand still. Stress is the name we give this tightening, yet the tightening itself is older than language. It is the echo of a mind that has forgotten how to rest in its own nature. There is a quiet truth beneath all the noise. The mind becomes stressed for the same reason. A fist becomes tired. It is holding on too tightly, not to one thing, but to everything, to expectations, to memories, to a self-image polished and defended like fragile glass, to the future's imagined perfection, to the past's unfinished chapters. The hands of the mind clench around ghosts, and the ghosts weigh as heavily as stone. This is the root of stress, though we rarely see it. The pressure we feel is not a force pushing in from life, but a force pushing out from within us. Stress is the mind's resistance to reality, a refusal to let life be what it already is. And this refusal exhausts us, moment by moment, breath by breath, until the simple act of living feels like wading through a river of thorn. It is strange, isn't it, how even joy can become stressful when we cling to it. The moment we fear losing something, it stops being a blessing and becomes a burden. Pleasure hardens into anxiety. Success becomes a cage. Even love, when bound too tightly, trembles under the weight of our expectations. And so we live in tension, not because the world is harsh, but because we have decided, often unconsciously, that peace can only come when everything is under control. But life does not bow to our plans. It never has. It never will. This is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. Everything shifts, breathes, decays, begins again. And the mind, terrified of this constant motion, builds walls around itself. Walls of distraction, walls of ambition, walls of blame and worry. Yet the world moves anyway. The walls crack. We patch them with busyness, with noise, with the next small desire. But a mind at war with impermanence can never find rest. Stress is not simply too many tasks or too little time. It is the tension between the truth of change and the mind's refusal to accept it. From the moment we wake, we reach. We reach for the phone, for the day's demands, for approval, for identity, for a sense of ground that never stays beneath our feet. And each reach pulls us further from the quiet center that waits beneath the turbulence, the center we forget exists, the center that never strains, never grasps, never fears. But we rarely pause long enough to feel it. Stillness intimidates us. Silence feels like a mirror we are not ready to look into. So we fill the silence with urgency, with speed, with endless doing. We measure our worth in productivity, not presence. The world rewards this, but the heart does not. The heart does not understand why it must race when no danger is near. The body does not understand why it must brace for impact when nothing is falling. And so stress becomes the background hum of our lives. Constant, familiar, almost comforting in its familiarity, like a companion who mistreats us, but whom we no longer know how to live without. Yet beneath it all, deeper than the stress, deeper than the struggle, there is something softer, something ancient, something awake. If you listen carefully, not with the ears, but with whatever part of you still remembers peace, you can feel it. A presence that does not tremble, a spaciousness that is not troubled by the rise and fall of thoughts, a quiet wisdom that whispers, "Nothing you cling to is truly yours." and nothing you let go of is truly lost. Stress arises when we forget this, when we become the clenched fist instead of the open palm, when we mistake the storm for the sky that holds it, when we believe that peace is something to be achieved rather than something to be uncovered. We chase peace like a traveler chasing the horizon, unaware that the horizon is nothing more than the meeting of sky and earth. Within our own perception, we run, thinking the finish line lies just beyond the next achievement, the next relationship, the next transformation. But the more we run, the further peace seems. Because peace does not live at the end of striving. Peace lives in the space where striving stops. Picture a lake. When the wind is fierce, the surface shatters into countless ripples. It reflects nothing clearly. Distorted shapes dance across it, fragments of light and shadow. This is the mind under stress, disturbed, reactive, unable to see reality without distortion. But the lake is not the ripples. Beneath the surface there is depth untouched by the wind. And even the ripples are not permanent. They settle when the wind passes. The problem is not the ripples, but our identification with them. We think we are the surface, we forget the depth. Stress convinces us that we are the agitation, the fear, the pressure, the constant sense of not enough. But this is only because the mind, in its restlessness, mistakes motion for truth. It confuses the temporary with the essential. This confusion tightens the body, narrows the breath, contracts the heart. Yet in every moment, even the most chaotic, there is a way back, not by force, not by rejecting the stress, which only adds another layer of struggle, but by softening, by opening, by remembering that the mind, like the lake, is capable of settling. If stress is the tightening, then letting go is the softening. If stress is resistance, then presence is the release. If stress is clinging to what must change, then peace is allowing change to move through us without fear. But this letting go is not passive. It is an act of profound courage, to trust the flow of impermanence rather than fight it, to allow yourself to feel without drowning, to meet each moment fully without insisting it be different than it is. Most people live their entire lives without tasting this freedom, not because it is hidden, but because it is simple. Too simple for the mind that believes salvation must be complicated. Too quiet for the mind that listens only for thunder. Too subtle for a world addicted to intensity. But the truth does not need to shout. It has been here all along, waiting patiently beneath the agitation. It waits in the breath, in the pauses between thoughts, in the stillness behind the heartbeat. A refuge not created, but remembered. Stress dissolves not when life becomes easy, but when the mind becomes willing to stop fighting what is already here. And so we begin where we are, with the tension in the chest, with the restless thoughts, with the heaviness we carry but rarely acknowledge. We meet them gently, the way a monk meets a frightened animal in the forest, not with force, but with presence, not with judgment, but with compassion. Because whatever we feel, no matter how overwhelming, is simply another wave on the lake, and waves, by their nature, are temporary. Even this stress you carry now, it will not last. It cannot, but it can teach. It can soften. It can open a doorway to understanding, if you are willing to listen. There is a quiet moment in every day, often overlooked, when the mind hesitates between breath and thought. A small pause, like a doorway left slightly ajar. You may have felt it without noticing, just a flicker of spaciousness before the next worry arrives. It is in these barely perceptible openings that freedom begins, not in dramatic revelations, not in grand transformations, but in these soft, unassuming pauses where the mind forgets for a heartbeat to grasp. This is the natural state of the mind before stress gathers around it, a state so simple that we rarely recognize it when it appears. Silence without strain, awareness without effort, a clarity that arises not from thinking, but from simply being awake to the moment that is already here. But the modern mind, conditioned by speed and fueled by endless stimulation, treats silence like a stranger. Stillness feels unnatural, even threatening, because it asks us to lay down the armor we've carried for so long. The armor of constant doing, constant planning. Stress feeds on this momentum, whispering that if we stop moving, even for a moment, something essential will fall apart. But nothing falls apart when the mind is still. In fact, it is only in stillness that things begin to come together. Imagine placing a cup of muddy water on a table. If you keep shaking it, the water never clears. No matter how urgently you want to see the bottom, your agitation only keeps the mud swirling. But if you leave the cup untouched, the sediment settles on its own. Clarity returns not through effort, but through the absence of effort. The mind is no different. Stress shakes the cup. Awareness sets it down. But of course, we are human. We cannot simply decide to stop shaking. Our conditioning is deep, intertwined with every experience we've ever had. And so we learn to pause, not to freeze, not to suppress, but to rest the mind gently in the present moment, to feel what is here, instead of wrestling with what isn't, to let the breath move naturally, like wind through a field of tall grass. In this resting, the truth of stress reveals itself. It is not a failure, but a signal, a messenger from the deepest part of the mind, pointing towards something we have overlooked. Stress says, look. Stress says something wants your attention. Stress is the body's way of saying, you are holding too much. And yet we treat stress as an enemy, a weakness to be defeated or hidden. We numb it, deny it, disguise it beneath achievements and distraction. But what if stress is not here to harm us, but to wake us? What if its presence is a quiet compassion, a reminder that no being, no matter how strong, is meant to carry the world alone? Consider for a moment how intimately stress is tied to the stories we tell ourselves. Stories of who we must be. Stories of what others expect. Stories of what success looks like. Stories of failure, of inadequacy, of time running out. These stories weave a web around the heart, pulling it tighter with each belief we cling to. But the stories are not the truth. They are echoes of fear, wearing the mask of certainty. They convince us that we are separate, isolated, singularly responsible for upholding an identity that never stays still. And stress grows from this illusion of separateness, this belief that I must be in control, that I must hold everything together, that I am alone in my experience of suffering. The Buddhist path gently unravels this knot, not by rejecting the self, but by seeing through its rigidity. When the sense of I softens even slightly, the world becomes lighter. The burdens we carry are no longer personal tragedies, but natural movements of life. Emotions arise like weather. Tension dissolves like mist. The heart opens as though remembering something ancient and familiar. But this opening is not achieved through force. It comes through understanding, a deep experiential understanding, that everything we cling to is impermanent. Every emotion, every thought, every identity, every moment of stress, everything changes, whether we resist or not. When we forget impermanence, stress becomes overwhelming. When we remember it, stress becomes workable. It becomes just another wave on the ocean of experience. This does not mean we become passive or indifferent. It means we learn to meet life without the extra suffering that resistance brings. We attend to responsibilities with presence rather than panic. We navigate difficulties with clarity rather than fear. We allow joy without gripping it, and sorrow without drowning in it. To live this way is to honor the truth of our nature, that we are not rigid beings trapped in unchanging form, but fluid expressions of a universe in constant motion. To expect ourselves to remain steady when everything within and around us is shifting is the truest source of stress. But when we align with the rhythm of impermanence, stress finds no foothold. It becomes a ripple rather than a storm, a sensation rather than a sentence, a passing visitor rather than a permanent resident. Of course, the mind will forget. It will tighten again. It will worry again. It will grasp again. This is not failure. This is the practice. The path is not linear. It spirals, deepening with each return to awareness, each moment of noticing the breath, each acknowledgement of tension, each time we choose presence over panic, even for a second. And in this choosing, something remarkable begins to happen. The world starts to feel less hostile. The heart becomes more patient. The mind becomes more spacious. Stress still arises, but it no longer defines us. It becomes an experience, not an identity. Think of a bird perched on a branch. The branch may sway, the wind may rise, but the bird does not panic. It does not cling desperately to the branch, nor does it try to control the wind. It trusts its wings. It knows it can take flight at any moment. This inner confidence makes the movement of the world around it bearable, even beautiful. When we learn to trust the mind's natural ability to return to stillness, the winds of life no longer feel so threatening. Stress loses its power to consume us because we understand its origins and its impermanence. We know that beneath the agitation, we too have wings. But to discover them, we must be willing to slow down, to listen, to feel without running, to turn toward the very sensations we once feared. This is the beginning of freedom. Not the absence of stress, but the absence of fear surrounding it. For beneath all our tension lies a single quiet truth. The heart was never meant to live in a state of constant defense. It was meant to open. It was meant to feel. It was meant to walk gently through the changing world, unburdened by the illusion of control. And here, in this moment, you can feel the first hint of that opening. A small softening in the mind, a little more space in the breath, a loosening in the chest where the world once pressed. This is not an escape. This is a homecoming, a return to the part of you that was never overwhelmed, never anxious, never afraid, only forgotten. There comes a moment in every life when the weight of striving becomes unmistakable. It may arrive quietly, like a sigh you didn't know you were holding. Or it may crash suddenly, in the middle of a busy day, as though the mind itself has reached its limit. In that moment, something inside whispers, "I can't keep living like this." And for many, this whisper is the first true sign of awakening. Not a spiritual awakening in the dramatic sense, but the awakening of honesty, the recognition that stress has not only seeped into the edges of life, it has woven itself into the center. It shapes the way we speak, the way we work, the way we love, the way we see ourselves when the world grows quiet. It is the silent architect behind so many choices, reactions, and regret. To see this clearly is not a defeat. It is the beginning of freedom. Because what is seen can be understood, and what is understood can begin to loosen its grip. Stress thrives in the unseen. It grows strongest where we do not look, in the habits we call normal, in the tensions we ignore, in the beliefs we cling to without question. It hides in our constant need to prove ourselves, to maintain an image, to fulfill expectations that were never truly ours to begin with. This is why the path toward relief begins with gentle observation. Not analysis, not judgment, but presence. A presence spacious enough to hold both the pain and the possibility of healing. When we look closely, we begin to notice how stress arises long before the mind names it. It begins in the body, a tightening of the jaw, a shortening of the breath, a subtle contraction in the belly. These physical signals are messages, waiting to be understood. They tell us that the mind is preparing for battle, even in the absence of an enemy. We live in a constant state of anticipation, bracing for impact from a world that is not always attacking. This readiness to defend, to control, to fix, becomes habitual, and habits, once unconscious, become invisible. The body simply carries the weight day after day, until the weight begins to feel like part of who we are. But it is not who we are. It is only what we are carrying. And what is carried can be set down. Imagine walking through your life with a heavy sack on your back. At first, the burden is obvious. You adjust your posture. You feel the strain. But as time passes, you no longer notice the weight. You only notice the exhaustion. The body aches. The mind grows irritable. The joy in small things fades. And you assume this is just how life must be. Until one day, you pause. You reach behind you. You touch the sack. And in that moment, you realize there has been weight on your shoulders all along. You never questioned whether you needed to carry it. You never asked whether the burden was yours. Stress is this unexamined burden, and each moment of awareness loosens the straps a little more. As we investigate the nature of stress, we eventually discover that it has a single root: desire. Not desire in the sense of dreams or inspiration, but desire as dissatisfaction, a yearning for this moment to be different than it is, a restless reaching for a reality that exists only in our imagination. Desire says, I must be different. My life must be different. This moment must be different. And so the mind tightens against what is here, seeking refuge in what is not. But life unfolds only in the here and now. When the mind fights the present, it fights the only place where peace can be found. This conflict creates stress, this pushing, this resisting, this endless tug of war between the world as it is and the world as we want it to be. This is the true origin of our suffering, not the circumstances themselves, but the tension between reality and expectation. To see this deeply is to understand why stress persists, even when life is going well. Even in moments of success, the mind whispers that we must hold on, maintain, protect. Even in moments of happiness, the fear of loss creeps in. We never truly relax into the present because the present feels fragile, slippery, untrustworthy. But the present is the only thing that does not abandon us. It is the mind that abandons the present, not the other way around. The Buddha called this restless grasping tanne, often translated as craving. But craving is not merely wanting. It is clinging. It is the insistence that peace lies somewhere other than where we are. And this clinging is the true fuel of stress. But let us be clear, wanting is not the problem. Humans are wired to dream, to create, to strive. The issue is not the presence of desire, but our relationship to it. When desire becomes rigid, when it hardens into attachment, the heart begins to strain. The mind becomes a battlefield between longing and reality, and the body pays the price. So we learn, slowly, to meet desire with awareness, to feel it without obeying it blindly, to recognize its heat without burning ourselves. This takes courage, because desire often masquerades as identity. We believe that without our striving, we would be nothing. That without our stress, we would lose our edge. That without our constant tension, life would fall apart. But the truth is the opposite. When the mind softens, clarity sharpens. When the heart opens, strength grows. When the body relaxes, wisdom rises from beneath the surface like a long submerged light. The softening of stress is not the weakening of discipline. It is the birth of real discipline, one rooted not in fear but in understanding. Yet we must also acknowledge that the path is not always smooth. When we begin to soften the grip of stress, buried emotions rise to the surface. Things we ignored, denied, or pushed down begin to speak. The mind, long accustomed to distraction, rebels against stillness. It insists that something is wrong. It tries to pull us back into the familiar comfort of agitation. This is natural. This is the mind detoxifying itself. This is the body remembering how to breathe fully after years of shallow breaths. A forest monk once said that when the water in a bucket is stirred, the sand rises before it settles. In the same way, when we invite stillness, the inner turbulence becomes more visible before it becomes more peaceful. This does not mean the practice is failing. It means it is working. If we can stay with this discomfort, gently, patiently, compassionately, we discover that even the most turbulent emotions cannot harm us when we face them with awareness. Like shadows, they lose their power in the presence of light. Stress dissolves not by force, but by understanding, not by escape, but by embrace, not by changing the world, but by changing our relationship to it. And this understanding begins with a single question, not asked with the intellect, but with the whole heart. What am I holding right now? The answer may be subtle, a tension in the jaw, a thought looping endlessly, a fear you haven't named, a pressure to be someone other than who you are in this moment. Whatever it is, you do not need to push it away. You only need to see it clearly, because seeing is the first step in letting go. And letting go is the first breath. There is a place within you that stress cannot touch, not because it is hidden, but because it is too simple, too quiet, too unassuming for the busy mind to notice. It is like the still point at the center of a spinning wheel, motion all around, yet unmoved at the core. Every being has this place, though most forget it exists. We search outside for calm, for meaning, for relief, unaware that the refuge we seek has been quietly waiting in the space behind every breath. To rediscover this place, we do not need to travel far. We only need to turn inward with sincerity. The same way a traveler in a dense forest pauses, listens, and slowly realizes that the path was beneath their feet the entire time. Stress arises when we lose contact with this inner stillness, when we drown in the waves of thought without remembering the depth of the ocean beneath them. But we are not meant to drown. We are meant to remember. If you sit with yourself long enough, without judgment, without rushing, without demanding anything to happen, you begin to feel a tenderness that was always there, a softness that does not ask you to be better, stronger, or more successful, a presence that accepts you exactly as you are, with all your imperfections, all your doubts, all your fears. This presence is not something you invent, it is something you uncover, the way a sculptor reveals a form hidden within stone. Stress is the stone, awareness is the sculptor, and peace is the form waiting underneath. But we must move with patience. Chiseling too aggressively only causes cracks. The mind softens through gentleness, the way frost melts under the morning sun. Slowly, naturally, inevitably, the warmth of awareness dissolves the frozen places inside us, until the heart becomes fluid again. In this fluidity, we find resilience. The kind of resilience that does not come from hardened strength, but from flexibility. A tree that refuses to bend will break in the wind, but a tree that sways, that yields, that dances with the storm will survive even the fiercest weather. Stress overwhelms us when we harden ourselves, when we brace against life. But when we learn to move with life, stress finds no place to take root. Imagine living in such a way that the mind is no longer your enemy, that the thoughts you once feared become clouds moving through a wide sky, that emotions once seen as threats become waves expressing the natural rhythm of being alive. Imagine meeting each moment, even difficult ones, with open eyes and an open heart. This is not an unrealistic ideal. It is a shift in perception, a remembering, a surrender. Not a surrender to despair or helplessness, but a surrender to reality, the way a river surrenders to gravity, the way the dawn surrenders to the sun. This surrender is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the recognition that fighting what already exists only multiplies suffering, while accepting it opens a door to transformation. When we stop resisting, stress loses its momentum. It begins to unravel. The tightness in the body loosens. The breath deepens. The mind becomes spacious enough to hold complexity without collapsing. It is in this spaciousness that clarity is born. And with clarity comes freedom. Freedom does not mean the absence of challenge. It does not mean the world becomes gentle overnight. Freedom means we no longer collapse under the weight of experience. We feel everything fully, joy and sorrow, hope and fear, yet we are not imprisoned by any of it. We learn to let life flow through us instead of trying to dam the river. In this freedom, compassion arises naturally, not as an obligation, but as a spontaneous understanding that every being suffers in their own way. Stress softens our arrogance, our harshness, our hurried judgments. It humbles us. It opens our eyes to the simple truth that every person we meet is carrying a burden we cannot see. A kind word, a gentle silence, a moment of patience. These become acts of liberation, not only for others but for ourselves. Compassion dissolves stress, because compassion dissolves the illusion of separateness. When the heart connects with another, even quietly, the walls around it begin to crumble, and in that openness, stress cannot thrive. But the deepest compassion must be extended inward, to the parts of you that tremble, to the parts that tighten, to the parts that feel unworthy of rest, unworthy of love, unworthy of peace. These parts have been carrying your suffering for years. They need your understanding, not your punishment. Offer yourself the same tenderness you would offer a child who is afraid. Speak to yourself internally with kindness. Sit with your fears as though you were sitting beside someone you care about deeply. This is not indulgence. This is healing. This is the path to releasing stress at its roots. In truth, stress is never the enemy. It is a teacher, a stern one perhaps, but a necessary one. It reveals the places where the mind is clinging. It exposes the illusions we have mistaken for truth. It points toward the wounds that our hurried lives have ignored. And when we listen deeply, stress becomes a compass, showing us where liberation is possible. If you follow this compass gently, patiently, sincerely, you begin to notice subtle shifts. The mind grows softer. The heart becomes less reactive. The body carries less armor. Life begins to feel less like a series of crises and more like a series of moments, each moment gently arising, gently passing, with no need to grasp or resist. And in this awareness, a new possibility emerges, the ability to rest in the present moment without demanding that it justify itself, without needing it to be perfect, without needing it to fulfill every desire. Resting in the present is not passive. It is the most alive state a human being can experience. It is where creativity arises, where insight awakens, where love deepens. Stress cannot survive in the presence of such aliveness. It fades naturally, the way darkness fades when light enters a room. This does not mean stress will never return. It will. Life will continue to challenge you, to push you, to surprise you. The human heart will continue to feel deeply. The mind will continue to wander. But your relationship with stress will change. You will no longer fear it. You will no longer drown in it. You will meet it with understanding, with breath, with awareness. And in doing so, you will transform it. This transformation is not dramatic. It is subtle, like the slow turning of seasons. One day you simply notice that the things that once overwhelmed you no longer have the same power. You handle difficulty with grace. You respond instead of reacting. You allow instead of resisting. You breathe instead of bracing. And this shift, gentle, steady, profound, becomes a quiet liberation. A liberation rooted not in escaping life, but in embracing it fully. So when stress arises again, and it will remember this, you are not the tension, you are not the storm, you are the awareness in which the storm appears. You are the sky, vast and open, capable of holding every cloud without losing your nature. Let the clouds come, let them pass. They are only visitors. You are the home they pass through. And in this remembering, the heart begins to soften. The mind begins to settle. The breath begins to deepen. Stress loosens its grip, not because you fought it, but because you finally stopped fighting yourself. This is the beginning of freedom. Not dramatic, not grand, quiet, steady, real. A freedom born not from changing the world, but from coming home to the truth of your own nature, a nature vast enough to hold joy and sorrow, strength and fear, chaos and calm, a nature that has always known peace, even when you forgot, a nature waiting patiently for your return.